This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Tyler Cozzens and Brandon Dodd from the Livestock Marketing Information Center start off today's show as they recap the recent cattle on feed report and trade data, as well as a quick new World Screwworm update. The show continues with Kansas Forest Services' Bill Waln and Rodney Redinger as they discuss wildfire concerns and what has contributed to the risk this year. They also note how fast fire can spread and what people can do to protect their homes and help firefighters. Rodney and Bill conclude the show with their fire safety conversation. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update from an agricultural economist at the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Brandon Dodd, and director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Tyler Cozzens. Brandon, Tyler, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Brandon, this past Friday on the 21st, we finally got a cattle on feed report, and what did you see in it?
Yeah, so because the federal government has now reopened, we're finally getting our monthly installation of the cattle on feed report back from the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service. And I have to give props to these guys because in the report, they were able to backfill all of the missing information that we didn't get last month for September. So they pretty much had to publish two reports in one. And why this is important is because this information is extremely valuable for the industry and how we're able to understand the supply side of our market. So thank you guys for getting this report out there. Now, to back up a bit first and take a bit of a look at what we knew going into this report. So analyst expectations around cattle supplies are pretty much unchanged from the last several months. And this goes all the way back before and is applicable for the September and October on feed report information. Supplies are tight, which means it's inevitable that we're going to see reduced placements on feed and marketings of fed cattle for slaughter. This, by definition, means that as a consequence, we're going to see losses to the total number of cattle that we're seeing in feedlots come the November 1 numbers. Because this month is a bit of a different beast and we have the two reports to discuss, I'll touch briefly on the September information first, and then I'll pivot a little bit more towards the October numbers. So in September, placements of cattle into feed yards was down about 6.3% to 2,021,000 head. Marketings during the month were also down, falling about 3.9% to just over 1.6 million head. This brought overall totals on feed by October 1 down by about 1.6% to 11.4 million head. Now, last month, because we didn't have the report, I discussed pre-report estimates as a proxy for analyst bias of the market. Had we gotten the report last month, we would have found that all three major report items were within the estimated ranges. So this is good. There wasn't something last month that, for lack of better phrasing, I guess, wasn't necessarily anticipated. Switching over to the October numbers, the values that we would have always normally gotten last week, that is, of course, absent of a shutdown, were also within pre-report ranges. For placements on feed, totals in October came in around 2,039,000 head, which is down about 10% from October of last year. This value comes off as a bit shocking, but it was actually forecasted by analysts who, on average, were expecting about an 8.4%. Some of the estimates on the bottom end of that range were down 10.5%, though, so a little bit better than the most pessimistic estimates. For marketings, they also fell for October. They fell about 8% to just nearly 1.7 million head. Pre-report estimates had marketings down on average by 7.7%. In the worst case scenario, so to speak, were the realized declines of 8%. Losses of both placements and marketings in October, as mentioned prior, inevitably bring down totals for cattle on feed to 11.7 million head as of November 1. This corresponds to about a 2.2% decline year over year. Now, regarding the market fundamentals that motivated these estimates and realizations, for the most part, nothing new has really emerged. The fundamental picture is very, very similar on the trade front with respect to the importing of cattle from Mexico. The border is still closed and is likely to remain closed in the near term. I'm not going to speculate as to when the border could reopen, but I do think it's going to be important to watch how these new facilities combat the problem in northern Mexico, especially in relativity to the weather outlook that we're currently getting from NOAA. They're anticipating a warmer and drier than average climate this year, which isn't great for the southern states and New World Screwworm, but there are still many unknowns that could unfold as to how that'll happen. As for domestic supplies and how that transpires into placements of feeders into feedlots, we already know the story. Supplies are tight. Feeder receipts of cattle sold were down 11.1% last month, and that was predominantly driven by auction receipts. On the marketing side, no more or less slaughter days were observed during the month compared to October last year. So the observed 8% decline really just highlights the further tightening that we're seeing in supplies. If we consider the amount of time cattle are on feed, inventories held for over 150 days are just booming right now. In the October report for September values, increases were in excess of 34%. And by this month's report for October, that growth didn't back off much, and we still saw about 31% growth against last year. Now, backing up here a little bit again, there was something significant that I mentioned last month that we've lost in last month's cattle on feed report. And I say losing a little bit loosely. In that report, we were supposed to also receive a quarterly number on the breakout between steers and heifers on feed. Again, I have to give a shout out to the folks at NASP because they managed to get that information in the report for us this month. This is a very critical piece of information right now, especially as many people in the country are anxiously waiting to see if there are signals of heifer retention and our cattle herds start rebuilding. That said, in the report, and this is as of October 1, so it's a little bit out of view, but still not that long ago, the amount of heifers on feed accounted for about 38.1% of the total cattle in the feed yard. This percentage corresponds to about a 1.5% decline compared to the same quarter from last year. Another way to kind of think about this value is that for every one heifer that you have in a feed yard, there's about 1.6 steers also on feed in her place. What that means from this report, I don't think there's really too much to take away from that value just yet. We're not seeing some of those levels that we've seen in the past for the percentage of heifers on feed that we've observed during expansionary periods. So really, all eyes are going to be continuing to look at what's going on with cow slaughter and heifer slaughter as we push into year's end and in the beginning of 2026, when we'll get another cattle on feed report with that information.
And Tyler, as we're thinking about cattle numbers, what are we seeing for trade?
Yeah, so as Brandon kind of mentioned, we're kind of on the other side of this government shutdown, and so we're now starting to see some more of this data start to flow in from USDA. And one of those pieces of information that we got this last week was actually trade data from USDA's Foreign Ag Service. And so specifically here, kind of looking at some of that beef trade data, I'd like to discuss some of that. And so that piece of information that we got was actually trade data for the month of August. But just a quick side note, FAS did note on their website that September trade data will actually be released on December 1st. So there's more trade data just around the corner for just trade data points there. So definitely looking for those pieces of information as well. But kind of looking at the beef trade side of things, through the first 8 months of the year, so January through August, total beef exports year to date through those 8 months were actually down about 10% to about 775 million metric tons compared to last year. So largely not unexpected to see a decline in just overall beef exports, given the lower slaughter numbers that we're seeing is just translating into lower exportable supplies. Now, a couple of notes just on the lower beef exports, where we're seeing some of those declines occur is Japan is down about 3% year to date. Canada was down 7%. China was down 52%, and Mexico was down 10% through those first 8 months of the year. But we actually did see higher beef exports reported to South Korea, which was actually an increase of about 8% during those first year-to-date 8 months of the year. Now, looking at the import side of things, total beef imports for those year-to-date through August actually continued to trend above year-ago levels, with actually year-to-date totals through August up about 25% to more than 1.5 billion metric tons. So a pretty substantial increase there as far as total beef imports go. Now, kind of looking at year-to-date beef imports from some of those suppliers, Brazil was actually up 72%, Australia up 32%, New Zealand increased 1%, and Argentina rose 32% through the first 8 months of the year. Lower beef imports were seen from Canada, which fell 3% through the first 8 months of the year. But kind of looking a little bit more at the beef import side of things through those 5 markets that were just discussed. I wanted to shed a little bit more light on who those major beef suppliers are in the U.S. and so kind of look at some market share discussion there. So through the first 8 months of the year, Australia actually accounted for about 23% of total beef imports to the U.S. Brazil accounted for 19%. Canada accounted for 18%. New Zealand came in at 12%, and then Argentina actually accounted for less than 2% of total beef imports. And just a quick note, some news items that came in as far as related to Brazil, their 20% total beef imports accounting for that is something to keep in mind, especially that the U.S. actually recently announced that they've actually dropped the 40% tariff on Brazilian beef. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that market as far as potentially seeing some changes as far as just flow of beef between the U.S. and Brazil.
Another thing we've been keeping our eye on, New World Screwworm, and Brandon made a mention of them. However, we recently saw an announcement on the 21st. And Tyler, what's important to share from that?
Yeah, so we got an announcement from USDA regarding some more just updates on New World Screwworm. And so a couple of key things from that notice want to at least point out to the listeners is that they specifically said in that announcement that as of December 21st, New World Screwworm has not been detected in any animals or traps in the United States. And the vast majority of cases within Mexico remain concentrated in southern parts of the country. Additionally, in that report, they did announce that they launched a unified New World Screwworm website. It's screwworm.gov. And that is to help centralize information regarding the pest and just things that are going on. So if you're interested, take a look at that. That's screwworm.gov. And just another quick note, border between the U.S. and Mexico still remains closed. So I think a lot of this importation stuff is, the flows between the two countries is still very much limited and restricted. So just kind of keeping that in mind is just overall just kind of few latest information pieces that we've gotten from USDA.
Tyler, Brandon, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That was Director Tyler Cozzens and Agricultural Economist Brandon Dodd, both with the Livestock Marketing Information Center. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing fire concerns with State Fire Management Officer Bill Waln and Assistant Fire Management Officer of Operations Rodney Redinger, both with the Kansas Forest Service. Bill, Rodney, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Good morning, Shelby.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Bill, as we're talking about fire concerns, what are some major contributors to it?
Well, it's actually pretty simple, Shelby. It's a mix of art and science when we talk about wildland fire management and wildland fire concerns. When we teach it, we teach the fire triangle. It's weather, it's heat, and it's fuel. The fuel being the grass and the trees on the ground that burn. The heat being the daytime temperatures and the relative humidity, and that's sort of associated with the weather as well and the wind, right? And so it's a combination of those three factors that lead to how a fire is going to burn or not burn on any given day. And in Kansas, any given day can be dramatically different from the other day. And so those are some of the things that we're watching for now as we get into the winter time. It doesn't mean that the fire season ends. In fact, we don't even use the word fire season anymore, Shelby. We use the word fire year. What we're finding is we're getting wildland fires, large, significant wildland fires that occur just about any time. And we don't have to think back very long ago, Rodney. I think we had the 4 counties fire up in the north central part of the state, and that was in early December, right? And so we know as Kansans, fires happen all times of the year.
When we look at that fire triangle of weather, fuel, and heat, is there one that usually starts it and another one that progresses it forward then, or how does that all look together?
So really, it's just kind of all those things coming together, right? So you have that heat and something will start it, whether it's lightning or power lines or dragon chains or something like that. But if it doesn't have the fuel, then the sparks just land in dirt, and that's totally fine, and that's no big deal. And like for us in Kansas, if the humidity is pretty low, where the weather really kicks in, then that really dries the fuel out. And then so a fire will start, then you'll have wind push it, and then that's when it usually will become big and problematic. And there's some challenges that we're going to face that are unique to this year that we can talk about in a little bit, but it's kind of just all those things coming into alignment at the same time that really cause fires to start and spread.
I think it's important to remember, Shelby, that in Kansas, and it's the same in all states, the number one leading cause of wildland fires is human activity, whether it's an escape control burn, whether it's a wheel bearing that goes out and you pull over on the wrong side of the road, if it's harvester in your your hay baler, the main bearing in that goes out and you start a fire there, right? So there's a whole different level of things that we do as humans in our everyday activity that really lead to most of the wildland fires that we fight in the state. And what we've come to see, unfortunately, is that some of the larger, more devastating fires have all been human activity caused in the state, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to do is work on prevention, making good decisions, putting fire on the ground the right day, right, and understanding that the next day, if you have a big wind event coming along, that you're going to have to do your due diligence and making sure that perimeter is mopped up on a controlled burn. So, but we are kind of our own worst enemies when it comes to wildland fires in Kansas and across the entire western United States.
If most things you see for wildland fires are caused by human activity, should everyone carry around a fire extinguisher?
I think what we ask everybody to do is just be aware, right? The more you're aware of the decisions you make and how it may impact your neighbors, I think that would be a big win. And then I'll go back to the example. If you're going to do a controlled burn, it's great. As fire managers in the state of Kansas, we think use of fire is a great way to manage the landscape. We do. We're proponents of it. But maybe you shouldn't burn on that day when the next day you're going to have 50 or 60 mile an hour winds. Maybe it's not the best day to burn, or you need to make sure you pay attention and do a little bit of extra work on those downwind perimeters of your controlled burn unit to make sure they're mopped up and secure, right? Just being aware of what you're doing, how it may impact other things would be a huge win in the state. Don't you think, Rodney?
Yeah, and I totally agree. And also, I know like I do a little bit of baling and stuff too, and I always carry a fire extinguisher in my tractor and those kinds of things. And, some of that's just, those are the little things that you can do that really help out. I think about welding, fixing gates or fences or something like that, just having that fire extinguisher with you just in case something happens can really, it can go a long ways in preventing something significant from happening.
How have this year's weather conditions or conditions overall impacted the amount of fuel we see?
Well, so obviously we've had a lot of rain, and it's been a real timely rain, which is a blessing, right? We've had years of drought and everything, but that timely rain from a fire perspective has also led to a lot of growth. And so we have had a significant increase in fuel loading. So the amount of grass and brush that's out there is more than we've seen in recent history. And so it could potentially be a challenge. And the other thing that leads to, I know folks that have been bean harvest, for example, has been delayed because of all the mud and stuff. And our fire departments are going to face that same thing if a fire starts when they take their fire trucks off road to go fight a wildland fire. That potentially, getting stuck just in some of the areas where normally we've been able to drive along and put the fire out. We may not be able to this year just because of how saturated the soil is. Anything else to add, Bill?
No, that's exactly right. And unfortunately, history has informed us, Shelby, that when we have a big rain year like we've had this year, it's usually followed by some dry periods. I mean, that's the trends in the Great Plains. We know that we have drought or dry years 3 years out of every 10 years. And so there's a very likelihood that if we get dry, and we will at some point, whether it's next spring or next fall or next summer, we're going to get dry again, then our fire intensity is going to be more dramatic simply because of all the good growth we've had this year. Hate to cuss the rain, but and we're not going to cuss the rain either, but we know that it's going to lead to more intense fires, and so we're working with firefighters and fire departments now to make sure they're aware of other alternatives, maybe not direct attack, maybe indirect attack, making sure, as Rodney mentioned, not just diving off the road, making sure that you got a good solid foundation before I start fighting a fire. So making good decisions, keeping our firefighters safe and our communities safe is what we're focusing on right now.
Are there things people can be doing to help protect their homes, which then should also help those firefighters when it comes to dealing with wildland fires?
Most of the success that a private landowner is going to have in protecting their home, or it could be in the community as well, is the work that you do before the fire even starts. That's the take-home message there. And so simple things like keeping flammable vegetation away from the perimeter of your house, we look at going out at least 60 feet. So some of those shrubberies, evergreen shrubberies, which look pretty nice right up against the house. We'd ask people to think about, do you really need that? Can you remove that? Can you keep your lawns mowed, green? Any wooden shingles and wooden siding? That's always something that we pay attention to, making sure you clean your gutters out. Having good ingress, good access to your property is very important. We've had several examples in the Hutchinson area of large fires where we just couldn't get into the property with the larger fire trucks, right? So taking the time to trim the trees away. So, look at your property. I encourage you to do a 360-degree walk around your property and see, could this thing really withstand a fire? And then if there's questions on it, Kansas Forest Service has the specialists, people with experience that can come out and help a landowner do an assessment of their property. Rodney, what other kinds of things would you think about as operations?
Well, I just think about some of it with time of year, right? And this is a great time of year to do it. The leaves are starting to fall off the trees and everything. And so stuff that maybe we did some yard work a month ago, now that's changed because the leaves have fallen off the trees, and that's what gets in the gutters. Sometimes when the wind blows like it tends to in Kansas, it'll shove those leaves up against your house or something like that. So just doing some yard work with like cleaning up the leaves and getting those away from your house and stuff. A lot of times it doesn't have to be some major project to protect your property or whatever. It can simply just be some yard work with raking leaves and maybe doing that final cutting with your grass or whatever to get it, instead of being 6 inches tall, now it's 2 inches tall, and that can make a lot of difference in protecting your property.
Bill, you mentioned about fire trucks and those big engines having space to get through places. How big, tall, wide of space do they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I need to clarify that both Rodney are very engaged in wildland fires outside the state of Kansas. And so every fire we go to is one of those fires that's somebody's worst day, right? And so we have lots of familiarity with this. And so think about on that worst day, can you get out as another truck's coming in, right? And so we unfortunately have experiences in Kansas where we have fire trucks trying to get into a property, the homeowner is trying to get out because the fire is right there and you're deadlocked. So we want a roadway that's wide enough for two vehicles to be able to pass each other safely. You probably need to brush up, I would say 20 feet. I wouldn't hesitate to go 20 feet. And that's also going to help with helping prevent the fire from spreading potentially from one tree to the other side of the tree to the other side of the road. So, think about having a roadway that's wide enough for two vehicles to pass each other, one person that's getting out of the way, and wide enough for the firefighters coming in trying to help, and then tall enough, 20 feet at a minimum, that you need to brush up alongside a roadway, and that's going to help allow vehicles to come in, but it's also going to help with some of the fire intensity when it does reach the roadway.
That was State Fire Management Officer Bill Waln and Assistant Fire Management Officer of Operations Rodney Redinger. They are both working with the Kansas Forest Service. As we do cut to a break, when we come back, we'll once again be joined by Bill and Rodney as they continue discussing fire concerns. If you're reaching your destination and aren't going to be able to hear the rest of today's show, you can always find it by going to agtoday.net or by searching for Agriculture Today on your favorite podcast platform. If you have more questions for the Kansas Forest Service, you can reach out to them through kansasforest.org. We're now cutting to that short break, but we'll be right back. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with Kansas Forest Service Bill Waln and Rodney Redinger as they continue discussing fire concerns. As we were talking about fire, how often do you see fire go across the ground versus get spread across roads through the tops of trees?
So it's not uncommon, I don't know, to say percentage-wise that we could say, 50% of the time or 75% of the time, but I would say it goes back to some of the conditions that we have. So if the winds are really blowing 50 miles an hour, then it seems like a lot of times the flames, instead of standing straight up, are being blown over. And so they don't maybe go from tree to tree. But if you're in that like 20 to 30 mile an hour range where the flames are standing more a little straight up, then you'll see the fire climb the trees and burn the trees a little better. And both of those conditions cause quite a bit of problems. Obviously, if the flames are laying over, they're just going to burn across the road, right? The flame from one side will go to the other side, and on the ones where the trees are a little more, dense next to the road, then that'll throw embers across the road, and those embers will cause what we call spot fires, and that's how it'll jump a road that way. And that's what Bill was referring to earlier with, if you can kind of get that stuff trimmed up, spaced out, it lessens the chance for those embers to, one, get up in the trees and jump across, but also it keeps the fire from maybe getting up into those trees in the first place.
Rodney and I both have lots of experience of fighting fire in the state of Kansas as well as the whole western United States. But I can think of back, Rodney, of several times where I've seen spot fires a half a mile out in front of a fire. When you get a cedar tree that torches and throws these spots, that if you got strong enough wind, easily a half a mile out in front of the main body of the fire, and that causes us significant challenges as firefighters trying to contain that, trying to find an area we can stop that fire. So when we have those days when the relative humidity drops below 25% and the wind speed gets above 20 miles an hour consistently, and we have temperatures in that in the 60 degrees and higher, we just know that the fire is going to be super active, assuming that we have a good fuel loading. And as Rodney alluded to earlier, we have pretty good fuel loading across the entire state right now with some of the rains we've had. So those are some of the trigger points that we look at as an agency when we look at activating or trying to get ahead of the game, activating our aviation resources, or bringing in some of our strike teams of resources and putting them in parts of the state that may be impacted by weather on any given day. But those trigger points, the RH, relative humidity below 25%, wind speeds above 20 miles per hour, and temperatures above 60 degrees is going to lead to some pretty active fire behavior in the state.
How fast have you seen a fire be devastating? In
Kansas, I've seen fires easily over 7 miles an hour.
Yeah, pretty easily that 7 to 10 mile an hour range. It moves quick. And, one thing along those lines is that it doesn't sound fast. Like 10 miles an hour doesn't sound real fast, but if a fire starts on one road and it has a mile to the next road, that means it's a 6-minute mile. And so you have 6 minutes essentially to figure out what you're going to do with the fire, how you're going to stop it, and implement that tactic to try to stop it before it gets to like the next road to where it could potentially jump the road. So it's quick. Bill's talked a little bit about in Kansas firefighting and out of the state firefighting, and a lot of the decisions and stuff are the same. It's just for the stuff we see in the Great Plains is that those decisions have to be made very, very quickly because our fires are moving very, very fast. And so it causes a lot of challenges, but it can happen in a hurry.
If people have questions or wanting to find more information, what's your recommendation?
Our website will have some links, but I would encourage you to contact somebody from Kansas Forest Service, and we would look forward to the opportunity to visit with the landowner one-on-one, or even go out and visit your home and see what we can do to recommend for making it what we call fire-wise.
Bill, Rodney, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Shelby, have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shelby. And we have a lot of fire departments and a lot of firefighters across the state that do a marvelous job year in and year out. And, a lot of our fire departments across the state are volunteer. And so just a big shout out and a big thank you to the folks that volunteer to help be part of the solution in their communities. They do a wonderful job year in and year out. And just a big thank you.
That was Assistant Fire Management Officer of Operations, Rodney Redinger, and State Fire Management Officer, Bill Waln. I will link the resources that were mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.